Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It is episode number 10 of Deadlock and Load. My name is Cryptic here with Banana Slam Jam. What is up, man? How you feeling today?
I'm feeling not too bad. I feel like this has been a pretty good week. A lot of gaming, a lot of chilling. I had a wonderful choir concert that I attended last night. And then tomorrow I've got casino night with my girlfriend and two of my best friends. So it's good. I remember we used to have our casino days.
Gamba time.
Yeah, back in Arizona, the throwback years. But yeah,
Yeah,
man, life's good. Feel like working hard and hardly working at the same time. How about you?
that's a good balance. That's what we strive for, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh, no, I'm doing really well. It was a little bit of an upside down week for me. Casting the ESL one Bangkok has like inverted my sleep schedule for a few
Oof.
days, and so now I'm kind of back or mostly back to my regular sleep schedule. But yeah, it's been a good week. Got some fun stuff planned this weekend. A little bit of a like friends Christmas like early Christmas party.
Nice.
Um yeah, so pretty chill week coming up. Excited.
Very good. Yeah, I will say for the people out there that have never done talent work, which is almost all of you, it fucks up your sleeping schedule a lot. Whether it's traveling, whether it's online work, like doesn't matter. These time zones for tournaments, that's probably one of the worst parts about being in esports, I feel like, is yeah, it's great. The entire world is made small. We love it. But yeah, sometimes the tournaments in Thailand that you're casting, Ricky, and you are like 12 hours or something, or like
It's like more maybe, I think.
14 hours.
Yeah, it might be 14 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, you probably casted from what, like 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. or something?
Yeah, so I asked for the early shift, the quote unquote early shift, which started at 10 p.m. local time for me, and we
Oof.
finished around 4 o'clock a.m.
Okay. Yeah, just a
Yeah,
completely normal graveyard shift for anyone out there. I'm sure people who have the graveyard shift can relate to that one. But
yeah, good stuff.
yeah, I think we've got an interesting topic today. Why don't you intro us
Sure.
in?
Yeah, so today's topic, we've seen a lot of people kind of discussing different things in Deadlock, and recently the hot topic has been the matchmaker and match quality. And I think that's a something that we haven't really addressed yet, but it is an important topic for every game. And so we decided, this would be a good time to do it. There's no patch this week. We really just sit here and talk about, what kind of makes a good pub game versus a bad pub game, and what are like some different, I guess, um, things that the matchmaker is doing to either help or make things worse, I suppose.
Yeah, I feel like one question that I think a lot of us would agree on a lot of the answers, but also doesn't get discussed too often is just like, okay, you had a good game. Okay, you had a bad game. Like, okay, what would you define as a good game? What would I define as a bad game? Like, how quickly do you know if it's a good or a bad game? Stuff like this, and how many factors are leading into this? Is it the matchmaker? Is it the people in the game, like the community itself? Is it the balance of the game? Is it, what is it that's actually at current moments potentially or heavily swaying your enjoyment of a pub game? And I feel like this is something that I was reflecting on also, despite what was kind of being seen in the Reddit threads for Deadlock, just because I was playing PoE, right? I think we've both been playing PoE, Path of
Yep.
Exile, and it made me realize like how much simpler a game is when you don't have teammates, right? Like all you have to do is balance the game, and all you have to do is try to make the gameplay enjoyable. That's pretty much the sheer focus of the game. And I feel like that eliminates a large percentage of the concerns if I'm a game dev or if I'm designing the matchmaker for a game like Deadlock. So I guess my first one that comes to mind, like my first factor that comes to mind for like a good or a bad game, is when you load into the game, like what's the vibes of the team? It's just, are people like I guess in Deadlock there's really no fighting over lanes or anything like that, but what's the
Yeah.
communication like? What's the first thing that's said? Is there like literally nothing said for the first 3 minutes, and then the second that you get out of position your teammate starts yelling at you? Or are there like people saying kind things, or like not just kind things, but they're actually like coordinating in lane to like saying like, hey, let's try to go for that. Hey, be ready to go on him here. Just general like non-emotional, but just objectively trying to call out the game. So I guess my first check would be, what are the vibes of the comms? And I think you learn that pretty early on. Very rarely does that shift mid game. What do you think about that one?
I think that's yeah, I agree. I think that's generally true. A lot of times for me, like when I go into a deadlock game, I like while we're loading in on the building top, it's like pretty easy to just be like, "Hey everyone, how's it going?" Like you just say hi and like not, not like just establish that there's a like a friendly voice on the team of some kind, because it really does make a difference. Like you said, when the first comms that comes through the team is a flame of someone being toxic because like either they need to blame someone or they don't like something that you did or someone on your team did, because at that point the rest of the team is just going to be silent, right? There's a moment where like the like you said, kind of the vibe of the team is definitely established by kind of the first set of comms in a way. So it's I don't know. I think it's important to just like, for me, like if I go into a game, especially if I'm solo queuing, to just say something, at the beginning of the game, be friendly. If you want to swap lanes, or if something, just bring it up and see if people will, and see how people react.
I agree with this. My first question that I always have kind of learned to ask myself in this situation is, why wouldn't people do this? So, because it seems like on paper, yeah, let's just make the vibes good when we load in the game. I feel like, especially if we're talking about solo queue, or if we're even playing like 2 or 3 member party queue with like another couple 2 or 3 member party queues, um, you're making it a more of a social experience than I think a lot of people bargain for, right? Where like they don't want to treat this like they're going to a restaurant and meeting people. That's kind of what I feel like you're doing effectively. And so my question I would pose to people who I feel like there's a large portion of player base that would say something like that, like, I'm not trying to be social. I feel like I'm then encouraging you the awareness that if you're not feeling social, or feeling like extroverted or whatever, to put yourself out there and say, hey, how's everyone doing? Like that kind of stuff, then let's just have some awareness about the fact that if you're not feeling like that, then you probably shouldn't feel up to yelling at the guy who just made you die, right? It's like you just can't have both. I feel like the majority of people in this situation that end up being toxic are the same people that would say, I don't have the time or energy or the headspace to like be really nice to people when the game loads in, but yet they have it to tell you how much of an idiot you are when you die, right? So I guess for me, my biggest thing would be people just generally having a better awareness of what vibe they're injecting into the comms, and the simple old classic saying, if you don't have something nice to say, just don't say it. And I think
Makes
that
a
would
big
go a
difference.
really long way. It would, right?
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. I mean, I'm people who know me from like Dota and stuff in general, like know that I'm a pretty competitive person, and like I have it sometimes, been
Everyone has
toxic
their
in my
moments.
past.
Everyone has their moments, yeah.
Everyone has a breaking point, does things, or they're like, they just get frustrated enough. But like the the blame game is probably the number one way you're going to alienate your team, and also like just someone on your team could be playing the game perfectly fine. You think they made a mistake, even if whether or not they did or not. And if you blame them for something, the game could very easily just become all right, well, fuck you then. I'm not going to try. And that's it. And your game's over. And suddenly you have a terrible experience in this game, right? It can flip so fast because of one bad, like one toxic person for just a flash. And like, a better person immediately would like apologize. But that's, it like never happened. Right. So, I agree with you. It's like be aware of like the headspace that you're in, but also like the good and the bad that you're injecting into the game can definitely impact your outcome. The If you want to inject like this good positive vibe into the game for the other people that are playing alongside you, as this is a 6-player game, um, you'll end up having a better experience. I think just generally on average, that's a given.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's like the first thing for me when I think of what defines a matchmake. Like, there's obviously like we're gonna go into other ones, but that's the first one for me. Is it's like, okay, is this like the most silent, dead comms that immediately has somebody blow up the second something goes wrong, or like what was the first thing said? That's the entire summary of what I was just trying to say. Is like what is the first established vibe? Because it's very rare to recover a good vibe, or sorry, a bad vibe, or to like throw off a good vibe. I feel like people are less likely to flame as well when the rest of the team is just generally being nice, because I think flamers, they always want an audience as well, and I feel like when people are just being nice to each other, there's generally less likelihood that they're going to listen to you or like validate you in any way or take your side or anything like that people want you to do. So I guess like that's first thing that comes to mind for me. What about you? What's like what's one of your top matchmake quality definers?
I think for me, depending on the game, but when it comes to Deadlock, um, it's going into the game with something to accomplish as opposed to just win or lose. I think, right? I think more than not often, if I go into the game and I'm like, if I win, I'm happy. If I lose, I'm unhappy. Like I feel like there's a lot of people who just approach games that way.
True.
Um, but to me, if I'm going into the game being like, I want to improve with this hero, or I want to just have some fun with my friends, or I want to try some weird builds, and maybe sometimes it'll work and sometimes it won't, and people might look at you and say, well, you're griefing a game by doing that. But it's like that's not all this game is about, like yes, there is one queue, whether it be ranked or not, but this game is still early access, and people want to have fun, they want to experiment, and they want to like be competitive. Like it's a place where all of those things can definitely coexist at once. But I think if you're going into the game with some sort of goal, I think that helps, for me personally, as opposed to just queuing for the sake of queuing and just hoping you win.
Well, I mean, so what you're basically also saying is it probably negatively impacts you in your games, or positively, if it feels like the rest of your team is doing something similar. Like, does this guy seem like he's having a good time? Does this guy seem like he's really trying, even if he's on a new hero? I do feel like you can pretty immediately assess someone's purpose, quote unquote, for playing the game, like when you hear them talk to you or the way they play, because like, are they playing to win, or like so you can always play to win without it having be your central goal of the game, right? So I do feel like a lot of the MOBA culture has bled over into Deadlock, where it's becoming more and more about, we've talked about it off podcast, but also on in past episodes of it's becoming much like we want to solo queue try hard, we want to play to win only, and I feel like winning is a factor of other good things. It's like I'm having fun, I'm always trying to play to learn, I'm playing with friends, whatever. It's like because you're doing these other good things, you will then win. And I feel like people are fixating on the winning aspect, and it's palpable. I think it's kind of, for me, almost it's like it's a very different example than what I said in regards to your own preparation for the game, but I also feel like it's very in line with what I said about the vibe check when it comes to, are your teammates doing this or not, and it's pretty clear one way or the other almost every single game.
Yeah, I think that actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so I like that. I mean, I like feeling like, I guess in that case, I think agency would be my next one, for like what makes a game good matchmaking quality. So a perfect example is, I'm just going to come from Dota because that's in my case, or in my experience, the worst one, is that I load into a game, it gives you 10 players, doesn't matter what role you are. In Deadlock, there's not any hard locked roles, except for like what your hero maybe scales to do in the later portion of the game, like frontlining, initiation, or damage or something. But in the lanes, it feels like there's not as much roles because both players are getting equal amount of souls. But in Dota, you can load in and you'll just have 8 people of the same role in a 10-person lobby. And for me, that takes away a ton of agency towards how do you make 8 people who want the same role enjoy this game together, right? It's kind of like, imagine if every game you just had the 10 Haze extraordinaire or 12 Haze extraordinaires all join the game and they only refuse to play Haze, or they refuse to play anything other than Haze, right? And so that's the equivalent of what I feel like happens in Dota, and I feel like in Deadlock there's actually pretty decent agency when it comes to like pick your 3 heroes, you prioritize. Generally, you'll have a good idea based on how popular that hero is. Like if I want to practice a hero 50 games, like I'll probably be able to play them at least 50 out of like 75 games if it's like Haze, for instance. But if it's like more of a niche hero like Mo and Krill, I'll probably get it like almost every single game.
Yeah,
So
like 50 out of 55.
yeah, so for me, it's I think the agency aspect going into the game. Not only do I want to work on something, but do I feel like it's within my power to not only establish that goal, but also actually be able to practice it within the game. And I think Deadlock has that pretty well locked down, to be honest.
That's a really interesting idea because I hadn't really thought about it, but it's very true. I think one of the reasons I stopped queuing Dota for the longest time is because there's just like times where I'm like, I just want to like go back to playing some of my favorite heroes or like just kind of messing around on whatever. And then you go into the game and then your hero's banned and you're like, oh, okay. And then you go into
Next
the next
game.
game and your hero's banned. And I'm like, huh. And then I go into my next game and the hero's banned. I'm like, all right, well, I've just spent 3 hours on this game not being able to do the one thing I got on the game today to do. And like that happened so often that I stopped playing Dota for months. And so that's a really like interesting point. It wasn't something I like thought about when we were talking about today, but yeah, having agency be able to actually accomplish what it is that you want to do or just to play the game in a way that you want to play is a really big deal. And Deadlock definitely gives you the ability to do that. Yeah, like you're not going to get the most popular heroes every game, but the game does at least give you a fair shot at getting at least, you know, one of your favorite heroes almost every game.
Yeah, I feel like if you have at least, I mean, obviously, if you have at least 3 heroes you enjoy playing, you'll get to play one of them every single game. And if you're trying to focus more on one or the other, it's more noticeable. Like, yeah, I'll get this hero,
Yeah.
if I put it on yellow rather than like lower priorities. So I guess for me, it's like there's a lot of impact that your teammates can have on your own enjoyment of like the vibes of the goal of the game that we kind of mentioned in our first 2 points. But I do feel like the general game setup from the game dev perspective influences this heavily. And the large portion of people playing games like Dota and Deadlock, even though they're very try hard games, majority of us are playing only a few games a day. So
Yeah.
these type of factors that can kind of sour the experience for you by just I wanted to load in and play my favorite hero, and you don't get to
Yeah.
do it. That sours you because, like, sure, maybe across 10 games you'll play them 6 times, but if you have 3 games in a row where your hero gets banned and you just don't get to play it, like, okay, so say that's a Monday, right? It's like, are you going to come back and play on Tuesday? And it's like, how many times does that need to happen before you stop coming back? Like you said, like eventually, how many times does like the hope just need to be pounded out of you in order to just kind of say, well, I guess I'll go play something else. And so I guess for Deadlock, I do think they improved upon that drastically. And as much as people will have the vocal people talking about like not liking matchmaking, that was something I was always very grateful for when it came to Deadlock. I wanted to practice 50 games of Warden. I got to play 50 games of Warden. That was so simple and something that I consider a privilege, not expected when it comes to gameplay.
Super rare when it comes to games of anything like this kind. Like that just doesn't happen. So that's yeah, very, very, very cool. One of the things I wanted to talk about specifically was like how the matchmaker works nowadays, since there is like and whether or not like it's a positive or a negative or anything like that, and maybe why there's some volatility in matchmaker lately because a it's constantly being adjusted. We had like a pretty massive rework of the matchmaker only a few weeks ago. But we also in the most recent patch had a change to how parties are built, like teams are built in pubs that I think people might not be paying enough attention to. Um, in terms of like it might be affecting the matchmaker in ways that we're unaware, and that is the idea that they're trying to fix like playing a game where you get comp diffed. And what I mean by this is like you'll queue up and you everyone's been in this game where you queue up, you're on a hero and you look at the rest of your roster and you have like the 5 carries on your team. You have like Grey Talon, Vindicta, and like Haze and Wraith, and you're like, well, what the heck? Like, okay, I guess we're just a damage team and we have no CC. And then you look at the enemy team and it's like Mo and Krill, Warden, Abrams, like Lash, and you're like, well, crap. How do we play this game? Right? Like,
You did
there's
not see my return fire Colossus Haze. I would have to go find that game. I did it one time. Or not Haze, sorry. It was a Wraith. I remember specifically having this exact situation come up, and I was like, somebody's got to go the fuck in. And
yeah, I do this on Furnace all the time. That was literally when I created my tank and Furnace build.
but
It's for the same thing.
I didn't mean to derail your, but yes, I understand what you're getting at. So you're talking about the fact that they made it so you have at least 2 initiators, right, on each team.
Yes. Yeah, so they made a change where they're like, we're going to try and prioritize each team having 2 frontliners in the queue. And there's something to be said about the types of it's hard to say like, the types of people that like to play frontliners versus the types of people that like to play carries. I like a little bit of everything. Like Abrams and Infernus are my most played, so it's like they're very different in terms of their roles, but um it's there's way less frontline players than there are carry players, and I think that is what potentially is causing some volatility in the matchmaker, where sometimes you're gonna have a game where someone on your team like gets outperformed just because they're lower rank, and it might be because the matchmaker tried to force someone into a team where it's like, well, you either put another carry on your team and you get comp diffed and you just lose the game by no control of your own, or we're gonna try and give you a better team comp and maybe you guys can work together.
Well, I mean, at that point, you're posing the interesting discussion of, pick your poison, because first off, no matter how many game players are in the game, I think unless you have theoretically infinite, there's always going to have to be some sort of compromise within the system.
Yeah.
The thought that I immediately had when you were talking about this, that I had not had going into this, was that, so when you're in early access like Deadlock is, and you're also working with a limited player base, I think every time you add a limitation on the matchmaker, you're obviously going to compromise quality in regards to other aspects of what already made your matchmaker what it was. So you mentioned, like, okay, now that you have 2 initiators, you're now more likely to compromise for maybe a lower ranked player in your lobby that's playing Abrams instead of Haze, right? So, and a lot of complaints that I saw were about like the general balance of skill within both teams. And I guess just to establish my thought on this is, I would rather prioritize balancing of skill over anything else. Like I would take that as the absolute highest priority in a game like this, because it is early access, and at the end of the day, you are given pretty good agency on your heroes. So if people are allowed to just kind of play whatever they want, and they're paired with somewhat equally skilled players, I think that's generally the best. Like, what I'm then saying is, there's obviously other factors, but I think it's very important for game devs to be generally aware of, okay, what's currently wrong with our system that would make a matchmaking quality low, and are we in a position to then add more restrictions because we feel like the system's rock solid as it is, or do we feel like we need to do something that currently cleans up a problem? And I do feel like you're kind of branching into new territory when you talk about adding 2 initiators and 4 backliners, like, to a team. Like, you're specifically manipulating the team comp in a game where people are supposed to choose their heroes preemptively. I guess I just worry that with a limited player base, as you restrict the game more, you're there has to be a ripple effect in there. There has to be like a bunch of random factors that are now compromised, and I almost feel like, this is sad to say, like good old day stuff. I like right when this game came out for the general public, I felt like it was just kind of wild west free for all, and I thought it was fine. Like I actually thought everything was fine. Like the only game quality I ever complained about was when the game score was like 40-0. You know, like one team was way better than the other. And I'm the kind of guy that's perfectly fine going Colossus return fire on Wraith because I have no initiators. Will we probably lose? Sure. But I'm also, like we mentioned earlier, not like that keen on win-loss, right? It's like, maybe Wraith can be an or a frontliner. You know, maybe. It's like, probably not. There's probably a reason it's not in her description of any kind, but it's one of those things where at least I kind of learned something in that game, and I remember looking upon it fondly and laughing. Like, oh, I tried. I actually think I won that game. But the point is that when it comes to like comp diff versus skill diff, I would take getting comp diff way more often than I would take getting skill diff. I feel like no matter how well-rounded our lineup is, if the opponent's just 30% better at the game, then it's over in most experiences.
I think that's fair. And also there is like we kind of mentioned it's like, oh, like you're gonna need a bad frontliner. I also want to mention like there is the very real scenario of like you are maybe a higher rank frontline player and you get thrown into a low rank lobby because they couldn't find like people. So like you're having a really good early game, and then you look at all your carries and they have no souls, they're not farming, they're just feeding, and you're like, cool. I can't carry because I'm the tank, right? Which is also an equally frustrating experience. So yeah, it goes both ways in that scenario, but I agree. I think usually just being skill diffed is very frustrating, where you feel like, wow, I am getting like we are just getting so outplayed, and you just don't really know what to do. Whereas if you are comp diffed, you're like, maybe I can find a creative solution of some kind, right?
Exactly. I think the reason you lost is at least kind of digestible at that point. Like if when you're skill diffed, a lot of times it's just a million little things that make people better at games, like slightly better aim, slightly better decision making, slightly better itemization. And it's like if you're skill diffed by a large margin, like they're gonna do like 10 or 15 slight things that are just better than you. And it's really hard to see small factors when you don't know which one it was. Like you don't know, you can't verify that was the difference. But like when you have like a equally skilled match and one team's kind of comp is better than the other, then you just kind of learn something from that. I feel like that's like so with that being said, I almost say my next point is, how often do I feel like I learn from a game? Like that for me is a big one, actually. It's not just that I went into the game with a goal or practice, but like how often did I come out of that game thinking, never quite experienced that one before, and I get to theorize about this item I tried, or about like, yeah, maybe our composition wasn't all that good. I'd say that has a huge influence on whether or not I enjoy a game. And I think in a game like Deadlock, it's a little bit skewed because early on there's pretty much always something to learn. But I think as time goes on, if the game is to have longevity, so maybe this isn't as much of a concern for Deadlock right now, but if the game has longevity, this is a really important thing. And I would say that a large reason I think a lot of people are stopping playing Dota, for instance, is because honestly, it's not even the game itself. It's the general player base that's making it very difficult to learn things. It's like, if I lose my lane, how do I ever learn to come back if my teammates just give up, right? So then I guess that transitions to, I don't want to steal 2 points in a row, is that it transitions into what's the punishment for misbehavior or giving up. I think that that's like a huge defining quality of a game. Like, does it feel like people kind of stay in line? Does it feel like, people abide by kind of rules for the greater good, and how are those enforced? And I guess I'll just be clear that I would always lean on the side of over enforcement in a game like this. I think it's very rare that someone is being a genuinely good teammate and a system would detect them as toxic. I think that's very hard to do improperly. And on the other way around, like, I would rather punish minorly toxic things than worry about innocent people being punished, because I do feel like the majority of players who quit playing a specific game, it's either going to be because they feel like their teammates are preventing them from learning something because of the toxicity, or because they just don't feel like playing with these people anymore. And I do feel like the only real advocate for a person that queues into a match, unless you're playing 6-person party queue, unless you're doing that, the only person that has your back is the game, right? It's the game, the rules in the game, the matchmaking system, its punishment system. And so I do feel like that over time throughout early access of Deadlock, that has gotten worse. That, like, generally the toxicity levels, the amount of cheaters, stuff like this, it feels like there's just a creepingly increasing percentage of games where I'm like, that one sucked because of that. That one also sucked because of that. So I do think that it's like still less than the majority for sure. But that's something you need to monitor now, I think, because in a game like Dota, I think that got way out of hand and they just left it. And it's still there. And I feel like it happened in Counter-Strike. I feel like it's happened in countless games where if you don't nip this problem in the bud, like now in a game like Deadlock, then it's only going to get worse. When people see that they can get away with stuff, they just do it. Like, that's just human psychology. Like, if you tell the average person, like, you probably shouldn't do that, just out of moral principle, it seems like your teammates won't really enjoy the game. How many people are going to give a shit? Like, let's be honest. Like, what person gonna be like, yeah, like, you're right. I gotta look out for my fellow man and just have a good time. So I do believe I have been a heavy advocate for this, and since the beginning, since I started playing Deadlock. And while there's been like that one patch with the frogs, I feel like that kind of fell off. Like, they stopped even talking about it in their patch notes. I don't know when's the last time we saw anything about cheaters in patch notes.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Here's the thing: I've never encountered a cheater in a single game of Deadlock. Um,
Really?
not once ever.
Wow. I literally was
Yeah.
like, in the weeks that I was still playing like 8 games a day every day, I was getting 2 or 3 a day. I'm not even kidding.
Wow. Okay,
What?
so maybe it's the Europe servers. Maybe this is a way larger issue in the Europe servers because
It's the
I
same in Dota,
know
actually.
I know in Dota it's that way. Where, like, there's way more cheaters on the European servers. Um,
That's so
but yeah,
interesting, actually.
I have never once encountered a cheater in all of my Deadlock games. And I know I'm probably an outlier in that. Like, I know people personally who have. Obviously, you have. But I think, yeah, it is. Even though it has never affected me, I do agree. I think it's something that needs to be kind of stopped, like, immediately. Like, they can't, like, if they detect a cheater, it shouldn't. Valve always tries to kind of outmaneuver them and then eventually, like, mass patch out how they, how the cheat was or how the exploit was done, and then they ban them all in waves, which I get why they do it that way, because they want to, like, prevent them in the future. But I will also just say that I feel like there is no way to ever prevent them, and without, like, a proper, like, anti-cheat of some kind. And so just ban them and make the game environment better for everyone else, like, immediately, right? I think that's, like, a pretty reasonable response. I do also want to say, though, that there's the slight creep up of toxicity that you mentioned. I think, I hate to always say this, but I think it literally comes back to putting an actual rank in the game that people can visually see, because people care so much about this artificial number that literally has no bearing on themselves as a human, but for some reason they
No,
tie
people
so much of their
do.
self.
People do have. What I'm saying is, I think in theory it shouldn't,
No, I agree.
but
That's what I'm saying.
it
They shouldn't,
does.
but it
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
And uh, people will care way more about winning and losing because it's going to affect some rank that doesn't matter at the end of the day. And yeah, I think the same thing. I think back to before ranks came out, and yeah, win or loss, like people just had fun. Like they're like, oh no, like whatever, like we lost the game. Let's queue it back up. Nowadays, like people are just generally more toxic because they think that there's more on the line when it's the literal same amount that was on the line before, but there wasn't a number or like a medal on your account that told you how good you are and what your self worth, how much you should, value yourself, based on that number. Like, I think that stuff, like, legitimately, we've talked about kind of like the psychology of this in the past, and it does play an effect on people. And I think that is like definitely a contributor to just the general levels of toxicity.
I was just gonna say that I fully believe before ranked came out in this game that I was getting pretty equal skill games, like for the most part. Like it wasn't perfect by any means, but what I'm saying is the game was matching me with people based on skill. Isn't that like the entire point of quote unquote ranked? Like to have competitive games of equal skill level? Isn't that like the exact point? So if the game was already doing that prior to the rank system, then I'll never argue with you after what I've experienced in Dota for a decade, as well as what I agree with you about happened generally to Deadlock's toxicity. I do think that's contributed a lot. I guess at that point, like the subject that you've brought up a lot and I agree with is talking about just party queue versus solo queue. I do believe that whatever the system encourages is really important, and we've talked about this a lot where it's like, does it encourage you to be a party queue? Does it encourage solo queue ranked? What type of general queue person does it encourage? And I feel like they're trying to find a middle ground. That's what it seems like they're trying to do, and I just think that's tough. I think that's really tough to appeal to everybody, is what I feel like they're kind of trying to do right now. And I personally, if I was trying to give real advice to a game dev, is I would say pick what you want your community to be. Do you want your community to be solo queue tryhards, or do you want them to be playing the game for fun with their friends? What do you want? I feel like it's very difficult to have both of those things in the same game. I just feel like that's very difficult. And most games that have tried that, I feel like, in my experience, eventually there is a wedge driven between those two aspects of the community, or two different members of the community, and it doesn't help in my experience. So I guess I would want them to choose more of an identity, whichever one it is, so I at least know. Like, I do think it's like, do I load in this game? Am I getting fun players enjoying the game, or am I getting tryhards that are trying to rank up? I don't know what I'm getting. So then I guess the next one is consistency. Like, how often do I go into the game thinking like, I know what I'm generally expecting from this experience. And I think volatility in this regard is very dangerous, especially when we talk about people only playing a couple games a day. So, if you suddenly have 2 bad games in a row where you got comp diffed, you had toxic players on your team, you didn't get to play your hero. If you have 2 games in a row that have one or more of the things that we've been mentioning, amongst other things, then this is going to heavily dissuade you from playing a game. But then at the same time, if like these 3 or 4 things go right, you're going to have such a fond memory of that game, and you're just going to want to play again the next day. And that's like, I think that's at my as I feel like we're kind of wrapping up on time here, I feel like my conclusion of everything is, what in a matchmaking system makes me end my gaming session thinking, I want to come back tomorrow, or whatever day I'm going to come play again. And I'm looking forward to it. And I'll just be straight, like, the first 2 months that Deadlock got released before ranked, I felt that way. Every time I was like,
Every day.
Nice. That was a great session. Looking forward to coming back tomorrow. And I feel like, maybe it really is just the good old days syndrome, or like, living in a fairy tale. But I really do believe that there was something changed over time, rather than just being the members of the game, that made this occur. And I'll still bank with you, and rather than just always saying this is the reason. I'll still say that whatever happened with the wedge that was driven between ranked and casual, before that existed, I know for a fact that this was not the case. So I guess just for me, guys, we'd love to hear your voice. We'd love to hear what you guys think about, like, what makes you want to play the next day. Do you agree with us? Is there something that immediately came to mind that we didn't mention at all? That's the kind of stuff that I'm interested to hear, because I feel like we gave some good points. I definitely like that I said something and you were like, oh, I didn't even consider that, and then vice versa. So yeah, man, what are your closing thoughts on the topic as a whole?
I don't know. I feel like, to me, the biggest thing is when it comes to Deadlock, I genuinely enjoy this game. Like, almost every game for me is enjoyable and I have fun playing it. Yet I still find myself playing it less than I used to. And I think part of that is the fact that I enjoy playing this game most with friends. I will still enjoy it solo queuing, but it doesn't feel as fun to me like playing with friends. And that's like a hard thing to chase, right? Where I'm
It
like,
is.
oh, it's like still fun, but it's not, it could be more fun. And so there's like this weird, like, I want to play, but I don't want to unless I have people. It's really weird. But I don't know. I think I still think they're doing a really good job with how they're trying to approach and at least make changes to the matchmaker. Maybe they'll revert kind of the idea of trying to comp diff people and go back to more skill based matchmaking. Who knows? I think for right now, people just need to take a time and kind of think, what is it that they like about Deadlock, and um, if you're finding yourself like really not having a good time, just like take a breath and figure out, like, what can go different, and what needs to be different for you to have to enjoy the game again. Because it's you're play if you're still playing, it's because you loved the game at some point, right? So um yeah, I don't know. I'm very hopeful for the game still. I'm not like, I think there's some people that are a little bit more doomer vibes with the game and the matchmaker and stuff like that, but maybe I live in like a fairy world and my games are all great and I don't know what's going on for real, but I don't think that's true.
I mean, it's like everyone's experience over time should kind of average out. I do feel like there's a lot that's going to happen over the course of this game's history, no matter how long it ends up being. There's a lot between now and when it would theoretically end, right? Meaning it could be 10 years, it could be 2, like, you just don't know. I guess all I want to have my closing thought be is that I think Deadlock needs an identity as a fun team game or as a solo queue grind game. I personally think it needs one or the other, and I would much prefer if it's a team fun game, because I was having a blast at the time when I was 6-man party queuing at the same time every day, and I think you just need to create a game that encourages those people to come back, because, I kind of said we wouldn't talk too much about the player base, but at the end of the day, I still firmly believe that the majority of the players who have exited the game fit that description. That they fit the description of, I used to play with my friends and have a chill game, and now I don't. And those are the type of people that gain loyalty to your game. I think Dota, for instance, is only alive still because it was like 7 years of gameplay before they even added ranked, right?
It was
And
all party
it was
queuing,
just
like,
party queue with your
literally.
friends. Party queue with your friends. And it
That's
created
all it was.
enough of like rapport with the game where people loved it so much at that point where they didn't want to leave, right? So, and you gave Deadlock like 2 months, and we saw what the player base looked like in those 2 months. And so, yeah, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I think the game needs an identity. And so I guess all I would say is that all we can do is kind of talk to each other as a community, talk to each other about, as players, as gamers. I think not just for a game like Deadlock, but as a whole, because I think it's very clear when game devs understand their community or not. And I think part of that is the community kind of learning to understand ourselves. So that's kind of the my TED talk for today.
All right.
But
Before we
okay,
close the episode,
yeah,
we got our last segment. As always, we can keep it short if you'd like. The what did we learn this week? It's our potentially non-deadlock related
yes.
segment. It can be about anything. So I don't remember who went first last time, but
I
I'm just
think
gonna
I
ask.
went first, so it's your turn.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay. So, what I learned this week, actually today specifically, was the Game Awards. It was something I look forward to every single year. As someone who's been watching the Video Game Awards since I was a teenager, back on like Spike Television and G4 TV. Uh, so it's fun to sit down and watch them. And today, a secret announcement came out from one of my absolute favorite game developers of all time, and it is Naughty Dog, and they have been secretly working on a new game for the last 4+ years called Intergalactic. And
Wow.
the
Okay.
trailer blew my fucking mind, and I am so excited to see more about it. So, if you guys didn't watch the Game Awards, that's one little thing to maybe go check out. Intergalactic by Naughty Dog. If you guys don't know who Naughty Dog is, I don't know how to help you there. They've literally been one of the greatest game developers of the last 20 years. So, yeah, I'm excited. It's
Nice,
not going to
man.
come out like anytime soon, but it is cool to see a game development studio create a new IP instead of rehashing and remaking old shit. So that's why I'm excited.
No, like I think one lesson I actually learned is that if you're seeming like you're having a tough day or someone else seem like they're having a tough day, just ask them what they're excited about in the future. I feel like that's something that I actually learned like a month or two ago, and I was like, wow, that is really powerful. If you ask me, like, people are generally more optimistic about the future than they are about present circumstances, basically, because whatever they're going through presently, they will worry a lot about usually. But in the future, you're kind of like, that's the fun thing, and that's like the
Yeah.
so I think looking forward to game releases. That's one of the easiest things. I feel like one of the purest things
Yeah.
to look forward to. I think
All
the
right. What
one
about
thing
you?
I learned this week, this is a little bit more, I'd say, personal, is to just cut myself some slack. I think I'm a perfectionist through and through. I have been, I'm a recovering perfectionist. I would like to refer to myself as, because I'm trying not to be. And sometimes you're just going to have a day like I had yesterday where you just have to phone it in, where you just have to just like, today's a day where I just go for a random walk and listen to a podcast or something. And I hadn't done that in a while, and it felt amazing to do that. I feel like a new man. It was actually Wednesday. I'm just in my head, it's like super early morning. So I'll just say to you guys out there that make sure you're giving yourself your time, because sometimes you just need to phone it in and have a day to yourself. So I've learned how powerful that is by doing it simply one time. Uh,
Incredible.
Incredible. So that's what I learned this week.
Yeah. Well, now y'all can take Brian's advice, throw on our podcast,
Perfect.
and go for a walk. But yeah, that's gonna do it for episode 10. We hit double digits.
Woo!
Many more to come. So just want to say thank you all for listening. Thank you all for tuning in as always, whether it be on YouTube or on Spotify. But we will see you all next week for episode 11 of Deadlock and Load.
See
We'll
you
see you then.
later. Peace.